What is up, guys? My name is Stephanie Kerr, and it is Friday, so you already know I am back with another episode of Seasons with Stef. And today, what I want to talk about is how saying yes to the calling, the greatness, the assignment, whatever it is that God has placed us on this earth to do, it really will cost us everything, but it will be worth it. That's what we're going to focus on today, because this week was a really full one for me in the sense that I had a chance to go through some old notebooks, and as I was going through the notebooks, I was seeing just some lessons. I was seeing some Bible studies. I was seeing some just information that I had written down, acquired over the years. And that was one piece that fed into my week. Another piece of my week was showing up on some really great financial literacy calls and just leadership calls. So that was another part of my week. But another aspect that I also was extremely fed by this week was preparing for a presentation that I'm going to do tonight. Now, this presentation is going to be on a woman by the name of Amy Carmichael. And as I was looking into her life to be able to share what inspires me about her, to be able to share what it is that she did that was so remarkable that over 100 years later, I'm still talking about her. People are still talking about her. That's essentially what happens when we say, hey, welcome. That is essentially what happens when we say yes. When we hear God calling us to do something and we actually accept the call that he's extending to us. And that's what Amy Carmichael did. So we're going to take a look at how her saying yes cost her everything, but it was so worth it in the sense that she actually fulfilled the reason for which she was born. And if we really think about it, there's a lot of people who are living right now. And as they are living, when I say living, I don't mean they're living an abundant life. I just mean they're alive. Like there's blood pumping through their body. There's breath in their lungs. They're alive, but they're not contributing. They're alive, but they're not living up to their full potential. They're alive, but they're not inspiring anyone else. They're alive, but they're not giving life to anyone else. They're not breathing life into any other situations. So it is quite possible for us to be here and for God to have a beautiful purpose for us to not see it, maybe not accept it. And as I say this really is a lesson that I'm accepting, that I'm learning for myself. Because if I'm really honest with myself, I recognize, okay, Stephanie, there's a lot that God has given you that you're not even tapping into. And I had a conversation with someone earlier this week. And in the conversation, they were just pretty much reminding me, you as a caterpillar, we can see you. We see the caterpillar crawling on the ground, so we can acknowledge that you're there. But what we don't get access to is the beauty that would come from you if you had allowed yourself to go into that cocoon and come out as a butterfly. So I hope that by the end of this live, you will be inspired to really just sit with God. And if you're not already walking in that purpose, recognizing that it's not a luxury to walk in your greatness. It really is a responsibility. So Amy Carmichael, her life story is quite robust. I don't think I'll have the time to go into everything that happened in her life, but I'll just summarize it quickly for you. So Amy Carmichael was born the oldest of 7 siblings in Mill Isle, Ireland in 1867. I believe that's the year she was born. So she is the oldest, and I believe there's 4 boys in her family and 3 girls. Her parents were devout Christians, and they raised their children to just love God and would teach them about Jesus Christ. And at a very young age, she had the opportunity to herself accept Christ as her own Lord and Savior. But from the time she was like a little girl, you can always tell people's personalities when they're like little. I'm not going to say it never changes, but you can kind of tell who people are going to be from the time they're little. And at that age, she was really rambunctious. She was bold. She was a go-getter, adventurous. And that's just who she always happened to be. So she accepts Christ, and she just made it her mission wherever she was to be telling people about the love of God, to be telling people about Jesus Christ, to be serving. She would go to the slums, she would serve. She would find herself as part of this program and she would be serving. Everywhere she went, she was telling people about the love of God, and she was making sure that she gave everything. Every fiber of her being, she poured into serving other people. And at one particular point in time, she really felt led by God to go into other places in the world. So at this point, when she received that call from God, when she recognized that that's what God was asking her to do, she was living in England at the time. And she had actually been staying with a family friend because she had gotten sick. So like I said, she's serving, she's running programs for kids. She's looking out for the welfare of those who are less fortunate. She's just really doing her best to make sure that Christ's love is being felt wherever she goes. And she gets sick. So she takes some time away from this service to go spend time with a family friend who himself was in his 60s and close to her father's age. Her father had passed away. So she goes and spends some time with him and is able to just rest and recover there. And while she is resting, recovering, that's when God speaks to her and says, "Go ye. I want you to go into far places where they perhaps have never heard of me. And I want you to go and tell them about me." So she applies to be a missionary in China. But because of her health, she's actually refused and they do not give her access. And she, at that point, she's a little bit confused. Like, God, I thought you wanted me to go. But she remains in England where she was for another year until an opportunity opens up for her to go to Japan. So she quickly takes that opportunity. She gets on the boat and she's heading over to Japan. On the boat, she is Amy. Now, that's one thing I want us to get as I'm talking about her life and as I'm talking about how saying yes to the call costs us everything. Amy was Amy wherever she went. Amy was a light wherever she went. She was a mouthpiece for the kingdom wherever she went. And so on this boat, she was Amy. And by the end of that time on the boat, the captain decided to give his life to Christ as well. So I'm going to let this plane pass over. But that's what she always did. She just allowed her light to shine wherever she went. And so she gets to Japan now and she is serving. Now she comes from Europe, so she's wearing European clothing and it's wintertime. This is a story that she shares. It's wintertime, and because it's winter, she's wearing gloves. So I think the gloves had some type of fur on them or something. And she's talking to this lady about God, the love of God. And as they're progressing in the conversation, she gets to a point in the conversation where she really feels like now I can tell her about Christ, and I believe that she's now ready to receive this love into her life. And all of a sudden the lady was like, I really like your gloves. Where'd you get them from? Can I touch them? Is that fur? What is that? And so all of a sudden this lady's attention is now on the gloves. Not about Jesus Christ, not about God, not about love, nothing to do with that. Her focus was now on these gloves. And Amy, for her, that moment was so incredibly just heartbreaking because she just really wanted the attention and the focus to always be on God. And in that particular exchange, she was never able to get back to a place with that woman where she was able to share the love of God, and that lady decided to accept Christ as her Lord and Savior. So from that moment on, she actually decided, I'm actually going to adopt the traditional clothing of whatever people I happen to be amongst. This was a woman who did everything in her power to make sure that the assignment that's on my life, the calling that's on my life, the yes that I've given to God will not be interrupted by anything. So from that moment on, she decides wherever I go, wherever God stations me, I'm going to make sure that my clothing is not a distraction. I'm going to make sure that I learn the customs, the traditions of the people I happen to be around so that I can really, really reach them. And as I'm learning about her life so I can prepare for this presentation tonight, I'm thinking to myself, how many people are willing to go to that length to make sure that what God has put them on earth to do, there is absolutely nothing that gets in the way of that getting done? Because other people around her didn't understand. They were like, why is she dressing like that? Why is she adopting the customs of the people? Why is she now wanting to learn their language? But she just understood this is a barrier that could prevent people from receiving the true mission for which I am here, which is to tell them about God. So, like I said, she was just like, okay, done. God, like, if I'm here for you, then this is not even going to be a thing. I'm just going to dress how they dress. I will eat what they eat. I will have traditions and customs that obviously to a certain extent, as long as they didn't go against what she believed, that this was what she was going to do. So she spent some time there and is successful. And I just want to get to, we're going to jump because her story is like I said, it's quite long. But she eventually ends up in India. And while she's in India, a lot of other women begin to flock to her, begin to just gather where she is, because they had converted to Christianity and they couldn't stay in their own homes. So they begin to form this collective of women who are telling other people about God. And there's a caste system that dictates that you can't talk to people who are in this social class. You can't talk to people who are in this social class if you happen to be from this social class. So they respected to a certain extent those different boundaries. But again, she was like, no, my focus is God. So even if there's a moment in time where tradition says I shouldn't talk to this person, if I feel led, I'm going to talk to this person. So this collective of women eventually becomes known as the Starry Cluster, because in the book of, I actually did write it down. I'm going to see if I can find it here. It's in Daniel. It's one of the scriptures in Daniel 12 verse 3. It says, those that are wise will shine like brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So that is where they got their name from, the Starry Cluster. And so they're talking about God, and children begin to flock to them. They begin to just gather, and she is sometimes even brought children who have been abandoned and other children who are accepting Christianity. Like, there's a whole collective of people who are just gathering around this woman at this point. And it becomes somewhat of a phenomenon that now she needs other resources. They need a hospital developed. They need a school developed, a church developed, all of that because of the amount of people who have come and who have now accepted Christ. So she's there, and there's this one story that I'm going to tell you about within that time period that she's in India. So there was a custom at the time where, let's say, a mom wanted to fulfill a vow. She would give one of her girl children to the temple to fulfill this vow. And there was a little girl named Prina, whose mom decided, as part of a vow that I'm filling or that I'm going to fulfill, I'm going to give my daughter up to the temple. She's going to live at the temple. She's going to take care of the temple. And another part of what these children were expected to do was to take part in rituals, which sometimes included molestation. So essentially to become a cult prostitute. And Prina's there. She's about 7 years old, and she's not enjoying her time at the temple. She runs back home, but because her mom had made a vow, decides, I'm not going to keep you here, and takes her back to the temple. Because she ran away, the women who were guarding her decided to punish her by branding her hands with hot irons to discourage her from trying to run away again. So Prina's there, and she's under pretty tight surveillance because they don't want her to run away again. But she hears about Amy. And she hears about this woman who people have called the child stealing something, because Amy is there, she's preaching about the love of God, and a lot of children are coming. And of course, the people who don't want to see this grow are naming her something that she's not, when she's only there to love. So Prina hears about this woman, and she gets a moment where she's able to escape. She runs away, and she just runs and runs and runs and runs until she finds this woman. She says to the woman, "Can you please take me to that child stealing lady? I think it would be better than staying where I was." So the lady takes her home that night. The next morning, she takes her to Amy. And Amy had actually been preaching in some other village, but had come back. And that morning, she was actually at home. And Prina just ran to her and said, "I'm staying with you forever. And this is where I want to be." So Amy receives her. And of course, the temple tries to come and get Prina back, but Amy defends her, and Prina ends up staying with Amy, as well as the other woman and the other individuals who had gathered in this collective. But as Prina is there, she starts telling Amy about what was taking place at the temple. And Amy is she's blown away by what this little girl is telling her. Now, I said to you earlier that wherever Amy was, she would always adopt the language, adopt the clothing, and she had already started doing this. She's been in India at this point for years. So she would even put, I believe it's like ash or charcoal on her face to be able to sneak into the temples and really see what was taking place. And she penned a book. I'm trying to remember what it's called. I believe it's Things as They Are, if I'm not mistaken, which just pretty much documents the experience of so many of these young girls who are in these temples, who are being forced to engage in these rituals and essentially be cult prostitutes. And she starts defending them and showing up for them and saying that yes, that she gave God all those years ago, it was coming to fulfillment, and it was resulting in the freedom and in the release of so many little girls, as well as so many people who needed a refuge and a place to stay. So we're getting down to the end of her story. And as this compound grows, as this collective grows, they decided, it's really hot during the summer. Maybe we should have a place for these kids in the mountains. So they're building a compound in the mountains. And one day Amy is walking around. She just wants to see how everything is going. And she falls. It's nighttime. It's a construction site, and she falls. She breaks her leg, dislocates her ankle, and the doctors thought that she would be able to walk again, but she never really did ever walk again. She was pretty much bedridden for the remaining 20 plus years of her life. But in that time period of the 37 books that she wrote, 13 of those books were written during that 20-year period. So as I'm reading about her life, as I'm like watching documentaries and different things like that, I'm just being so challenged to recognize there's just no excuse. She's literally bedridden at this point in the last 20 years of her life, and she's still serving. She's still loving on people. She's still making sure that the yes that she gave to God all those years ago is manifesting into something beautiful that is touching the lives of other people. Oh, there's one thing I forgot to mention. I believe it was while she was in Japan. She was there, and she's telling people about the love of God, and she really feels that God is saying to her, I actually want you to remain single. So she says, God, if that's what you want, then that's what I'm going to do. So this woman gave up family. She left where she was, went to another place in the world, never returned back to England after having gone to India that last time, spent her life defending the defenseless, and was even taken to court because, of course, it's very lucrative. Prostitution is super lucrative, okay? The game is super lucrative. I remember when I was working at a mental health and addiction center when I first got out of university, and we had a gender-based violence program. So people who are exiting the game or prostitution, they can come for counseling and different things like that. And I remember at that time, and this was years ago, at that time, you could make $100,000 off of one girl in 1 month. So just imagine somebody who is prostituting multiple individuals, right? So it's the very same thing in this context. People are not happy that Amy is rescuing these kids because they're kind of messing with their money. But she, even though she was taken to court, she defended them. Even though she was being labeled different things that she really was not, she stood for what she was designed and created by God to stand for, which was to be a mother to the motherless and a defender of those who are defenseless. So that is essentially the life of Amy Carmichael. There's so many more pieces and stories in there, but that's like the general outline of her story. And again, as I was listening to it, I was watching a documentary in particular. I read some other articles and stuff like that, but I was like, wow, Stephanie, you really have to just give a complete yes. Welcome. Just give a complete yes. Because the reason I'm here talking about Amy Carmichael hundreds of years after she was born is because she did something great. It's because she actually said yes and walked with God. Everywhere that he led her to go, she was like, it's not going to be easy, but I'll go. If I have to leave my family, then I'll go. If I have to remain single, then I'll remain single. If I have to adopt the customs of these people so that I can reach them more effectively, that's what I'll do. If I have to learn Tamil, that's what I'll do. It was literally just a non-negotiable attitude because she had given her commitment to God and she was intentional about just saying yes. So I didn't actually put a title for today's live, but I believe it will probably be something along the lines of how saying yes will cost us everything, but it will be so worth it. Because when she breathed her last breath, I'm sure God was pleased, but I'm also sure that she was able to know within her heart of hearts, I gave everything. Like, everything that was in me, I gave to the service of others in the name of my Lord. I didn't hold anything back. I was willing to risk my life. I was willing to leave those I loved. I was willing to suffer. I was willing to push past. I didn't even mention this. She actually had a health condition called neuralgia, which is a super painful nerve disorder that often had her bedridden. She pushed past that as well. And so I really look at it, and of course, we're not all called to do the same thing. I get that. But I just look at, and in fact, my focus really should be on myself, because sometimes we're so focused on what other people around us are doing. But if I even look at myself, can I say I'm giving 110% to what I know God has called me to do? Because that's the only way that I'll be able to say, when I'm standing before God on Judgment Day, I served you with everything that I had, with everything that I was, with my complete heart. I gave it to you. I showed up. And I did it because I loved you. And I did it because you are a good God to me. Right? So that is essentially what I wanted to talk about today. That's like the big lesson that's been coming up this week for me. And I'll summarize it like this. Walking in or living into our greatness is not a luxury. It is a responsibility. Because just imagine if she had decided, you know what, it's going to be a little bit challenging for me to leave everyone who I love and everything I know to go tell other people, like, someone else can go. She never would have ended up in India and never would have become a social reformer, which is what she was eventually known as. A social reformer who came and advocated for people who had no one advocating for them. This was a cultural practice. This is what we do here. And there's even other people who were saying to her, like, don't even mess with that. Don't touch that. That's just how we do things around here. It may not be right, but we don't need to go digging into that. But she was determined to fulfill the calling on her life. And that is what truly made Amy Carmichael great. And that is what I believe will make you, will make me great. And when I say great, I don't mean that we're trying to make a name for ourselves, but I believe that if you've lived and your works have followed you, that is what I determine as someone who's truly, truly great. You've done something that's worthwhile speaking about long after you've gone. So again, my encouragement to you and me especially, because I want to talk to myself first before I'm sharing with other people, is that whatever God has called us to do, it will require sacrifice and it will require us to go beyond ourselves, but it will be worth it. That's the reason why we were created, to bring him glory. So that is the lesson from the week, the main lesson from the week. There were so many, like I said, but I just hope that even if you look into her life or just look into your own life, I'm definitely going to be looking at some of the things that I need to be doing more consistently, pursuing more aggressively, just because we only have a certain amount of time on this earth. And it would be such a shame to have a huge, great calling on our lives that we never fulfill simply because we didn't want to give it everything. So, by God's grace, that will not be me. By God's grace, that will definitely not be you. My name is Stephanie. This has been the live for today. If there are any comments, I will give you guys a couple seconds to give any feedback or just anything like that. But again, it will cost us. There will be sacrifice involved. But if it's for God, it will be worth it. I think you guys are pretty silent today. So I'm going to end this live. And I hope that you guys have an amazing weekend.